3. Dear brothers and sisters, Christ is in our midst. Today I will talk about Saint Dunstan. Saint Dunstan was Archbishop of Canterbury and was Bishop of London, Abbot of Glastonbury Abbey, Bishop of Worcester, and he was canonized as a saint. He was born circa 909 until May 19, 988. Very interested. The year when Kievan Rus, today's Ukraine, was baptized. He was an English bishop. So 1,000 years prior to baptism of Kievan Rus, England, UK was an Orthodox state and was Orthodox, accepted Christianity, as Father David Belden, my friend who is an old calendarist priest, likes to say. His work restored the monastic life in England and reformed the English church. His 11th century biographer Osbern, himself as an artist scribe, states that Dunstan was skilled in making a picture and forming letters, as the other clergy of his age who reached senior rank. Dunstan served as an important minister of state to several English kings. He was the most popular saint of England for nearly 2 centuries, having gained fame for many stories and great mates, not least among which of those concerning fame, cunning, and defeating the devil. His early life. According to Dunstan's earlier biographer, his parents were Dunstan and Sinterud, and they lived near Glastonbury. His biographer states that Dunstan, orator in the days of King Ellenstein from 924 to 939, orator has often been taken to mean born. By this unlikely, and another source states that he was ordained during Einstein's reign and would have been under minimum age of 30, and he was born no earlier than 924. In more likely, orator should be taken, emerged, and then he was born in 910. The biographer states that that he was related to Ethan the Bell, the Bishop of Winchester, and Synod, Bishop of Lichfield. According to later biographer, Adalbert of Gent was a nephew of Edhelm, Bishop of Canterbury. But in this less certain is to mention by biographer should have known and had been a member of Dunstan's household. As a young boy, Dunstan studied under Irish monks who had been occupied in the ruins of Glastonbury Abbey. According to his youthful optimism, and his wisdom and vision of Abbey has been restored. While being a boy, Dunstan was stricken with near fatal illness and was affected seemingly miraculous recovery. Even as a child, he was noted for his devotion to learning, for his mastery of many kinds and artistic craftsmanship. With his parents' consent, he was tonsured and received minor orders and served in the ancient church of St. Mary. He became so well known as his devotion to learning that he is said to have been summoned to Edhelm to enter his service. He was later appointed to court by King Dunstan. Dunstan has become a favorite of king, and he was an envy and other members of the court. The plot was hatched to disgrace him, and Dunstan was accused of being involved with witchcraft and black magic. The king ordered him to leave court, and Dunstan was leaving the place of his enemies who physically attacked him and tortured him and beat him severely and bound him and threw him into the cesspool. He managed to crawl and make his way to the house of a friend. From there, his journey to Winchester entered the service of edited Bishop of Winchester. The bishop tried to pursue him to become a monk, but Dunstan was doubtful whether he had a vocation to be a celibate. For celibate life was a challenge in that time. The answer came in from attack of swelling tumors over Dunstan's body. This ailment was severe that he was thought to be a leprosy. It was more probably some form of blood poison caused by being beaten and thrown to cesspool. Whatever cause, it changed Dunstan's mind. He took the holy orders in 943 in the presence of edited and returned to live a life as a hermit at Glastonbury. Against of old church of St. Mary, he built a small cell 5 feet long and 2.5 feet deep, and he was there that Dunstan stood, worked at his art and played on his harp. At his time, according to late 11th century legend, the devil is said to tempt Dunstan, who had been held in the face of Dunstan's tongue. Life as a monk. Dunstan worked as a silversmith and scriptum while he was living in Glastonbury, and it took likely that he was an artist, took a lot of time, and drew well-known image of Christ. And that well-known image of Christ was preserved in museum in London. And I saw it myself, so beautiful, preserved. And Dunstan became a famous musician as well, illuminator and metal worker. Lady of Ethelbert, king of Einstein's niece, made Dunstan trust advisor, and one of her death, she left considerable fortune to him. He used his money to a later life to foster and encourage monastic revival in England. About the same time, his father, Herostan, died, and Dunstan inherited his fortune as well. He became a person of great influence. On the death of King Einstein 1940, and King Edmund summoned him to his court at the Cedar, make him a minister. Again, royal favor foresee the jealousy among the other countries, and again Dunstan enemies succeeded their plots. The king was prepared to send Dunstan away. There was a certain invoice from the Eastern Kingdom, which probably meant East Anglia. Dunstan improved envies to take him with them to return their homes. They agreed to do so, but never that happened. The story record: the king ride out hunt and stage the Mindeep forest. He became separated from his attendants and followed the stage at a great spread of direction of cedar cliffs. The stag rushed blindly over and participies as the following founts. Edmund endures finally to stop his horse. Then, seeing the death to be imminent, he remembered his harsh treatment of Saint Dunstan, promising and make amends of his life was spread. At that moment, his horse was stopped in very edge of the cliff. Giving thanks to God, he returned forth with his place and called Saint Dunstan and bade him follow and rode straight to Glastonbury. Entering the church, the king first knelt and prayed before the altar, then making Saint Dunstan by hand, he gave him a kiss of peace and led him to the abbot's throne and seating him thereon, promising all of the assistance in restoring divine worship in regular observance. He was the Abbot of Glastonbury. Dunstan, now Abbot of Glastonbury, went to work at once on task reform. He had to recreate monastic life and rebuild the abbey. He began establishing Benedictine monasticism in Glastonbury. The rule of Saint Benedict was the basis of restoration according to the author's eager establishment of monasteries written in 1960s and 1970s, and according to Dunstan's first biographer, who had been a member of community of Glastonbury. Their statements are also in accordance with the nature of first measures as an abbot, with significance of his first buildings, and with the Benedictine leanings of his prominent disciples. Nevertheless, now all of members of Dunstan's community at Glastonbury were monks who followed Benedictine rule. In the fact, Dunstan's first biographer was a cleric of who eventually joined community of canons at Leeds after leaving Glastonbury. Dunstan's first care was to rebuild the church of St. Peter and rebuild the cloister, re-establishing the monastic enclosure. The secular affairs of those were committed to his brother Wulfric, so that neither himself or any other professed monks might break enclosure. A school was for local youth founded and soon became the most famous of its time in England. A substantial extension of imagination system of Somerset levels who also were completed. Within the years of Dunstan's appointment in 946, King Edmund was assassinated. His successor was Edward. The policy of new government was supported by Queen Mother, Adolphe of Kent, by Archbishop of Canterbury Oda, and by East Anglian nobles and those who had powerful Edelman, Einstein, and the half-king. It was a policy of unclarification and conciliation within a Danish half of kingdom. A goal was a firm establishment of royal authority in essential matter in the spread of Orthodox Christian observance of Western Rite, and rebuilding the churches, the moral reform of clergy and laity, and the end of religion of Danes in England. Against all those reforms were the nobles of Wessex, who included the most Dunstan's own relatives, who had been interested in maintaining and establishing the customs. For 9 years, Dunstan's influence was dominant, during which time he twice refused the office of bishop at Winchester in 1941 and accreditation in 1953, affirming that he would leave the king's side along with the kings lived and needed him. In 1955, Edward died, and situation was once changed. Edwin, the elder son of Edmund, who then came to throne, was headstrong youth, wholly devoted to reactionary nobles. According to one legend, the feud with the Dunstans began day when Edwin's coronation. He failed to attend the meeting of the nobles. When Dunstan eventually found the young monarch, he was cavorting with a noble woman named Engelfu and her mother, refusing to return with the bishop. In fruit of this, Dunstan dragged Edwin back and forced him to renounce the girl as stamped. Later releasing that he had provoked the king, Dunstan fled and appeared sanctuary of his cloister, but Edwin. He was initiated by Edwig, who he married. Edwigo, who he married, followed him and founded in the monastery. So he married her against the will of St. Dunstan. Although St. Dunstan managed to escape and he saw that his life was in danger, he fled to England and crossed the Channel of Flanders, where he found himself ignorant in the language of customs and locals. The court of Flanders, Arnulf I, received him with honor and lodged him of Abbey of Mount Blendon near Ghent. He was once in the center of Benedictine revival of country, and Dunstan was able to be for first time to observe a strict observance that he had seen in his rebirth of Cluny and beginning of century. His exile was not long duration. Before 957, the Mercenus and Nordbrunnus revolted and drove all out by Edwig, choosing his brother Edgar of country of North Thames. In the south, he remained faithful to Edwin as an Edgar advisor recalled by Dunstan. He was Archbishop, Bishop of Worcester and of London, and Archbishop from year 957 until 978. On Dunstan's return, Archbishop Oda consecrated him a bishop on the death of Conwald of Worcester and Worcester, and of the end of 957. Oda appointed Dunstan to see. So all that time church was one, and he was part of Orthodox Church of Western Rite. In the following year of the See of London became vacant, and he was conferred on Dunstan, who had summoned to be of Bishop of Worcester. In October 1959, Edwin died, and he was brother of Edgar, readily accepted a rule of Wessex. One Edwin's final act was to be appointed successor of Archbishop of Oda, who died on June 2nd, 1958. The chosen candidate, Ellsworth of Winchester, but he was chosen, but he died, and he couldn't he died in Alps, and he could not go to journey to Rome for Pallium. But in his place, Edwig nominated Bishop of Wales and Bethlehem. Soon Edgar became a king, and reversed the second choice of ground at Birmingham, that not been governed even of this diocese properly. The archbishopric was then conferred Dunstan. Dunstan of Canterbury has become Archbishop of Canterbury, so Church of England today. In that time was Orthodox. So this was a decree which is preserved, and the theological manuscript of Glastonbury. Abbot was ordained writing this book. So we have many references that those are historic facts. Dunstan went to Rome in 1960 and received pallium by Pope John XII. On his journey there, Dunstan's acts of charity were lavish, as to leave nothing for himself, his attendants. His steward complained, but Dunstan seemed to suggest trust in Jesus Christ. On his return to Rome, Dunstan at once managed his position as a virtual Prime Minister of Kingdom. But his advisor Osbern was appointed to bishopric of London and Oswald of Worcester in 1963. Atwood, Archbishop of Abingdon, was appointed the see of Winchester. With the aid and with the ready support of King Edgar, Dunstan pushed forward his reforms of English Church. The monks of his communities were thought to live in spirit of self-sacrifice, and Dunstan actively enforced the law of celibacy whenever possible. He forbade the practices of simony, selling ecclesiastical offices for money, and ended the custom of clerics appointed relatives to offices under their jurisdictions. Monasteries were built at some of great cathedrals. Monks took the place of secular canons, and the rest of canons were obligated to live according to rule. The parish priests were completed to be qualified for their office, and they were urged to teach parishioners not only the truths of the Christian faith, but also the traits to improve their position. The state saw reforms as well. Good order was maintained through the realm that there was respect for law. Trained band police of north and navy guarded the shores from the Viking raids. There was a level of peace in the kingdom unknown in living memory. In 1973, Dunstan's statesmanship reached its zenith when he officiated at the coronation of King Edgar. Edgar was crowned at the bath of imperial ceremony planned not as an imitation but as a culmination of his reign, and move that must have taken a great deal of preliminary diplomacy. This service, devised by Dunstan himself and celebrated with the poem of Anglo-Saxon chronicle, forms in basis of present-day British coronation ceremony. We will see ceremony very soon of our King Charles III. There was a second symbolic coronation held later. He was an important step. That was an important step of the other kings of Britain. They came to give allegiance to Edgar at Chester. 6 kings of Britain, including kings of Scotland and Strathclyde, pledged their faith, and they would be kings legament at sea and land. Edgar ruled as a strong and popular king for 16 years. In 1975, he was succeeded by eldest son Edward the Martyr. His accession was disputed by stepmother Elfred, who wished her own son Alfred to rule Rhine. Through the influence of Dunstan, Edward was chosen and crowned at Winchester. Edgar's death had encouraged reactionary nobles at once that there was determined attack upon the monks and protagonists of reform. Through Mercia and with the persecuted and deprived of their possessions. Their cause, however, was supported by Athelwine, the elder woman of East Anglia, and realm was serious danger of civil war. 3 meetings of Wheaton were held to settle these disputes in Kirtilion and Keln and Amesbury, and the second of them was floor of the hall where Wheaton was sitting, and gave away and will accept the Dunstan as clung to balm and well of room below. Several men were killed. Final years were 1978 and 1988. So he died when Kievan Rus was baptized by Saint Prince Volodymyr and Michael, first Archbishop of Kiev. So the same years, not a coincidence. In March 1978, Edward was assassinated at the Corfe Castle, possibly as an instigation of his stepmother. Edward of Unready became a king. His coronation was on Low Sunday on March 31st, 1978, and he was the last state event which Dunstan took part, according to William of Malmesbury, writing over the century later, when the young king took usual oath to govern well. Dunstan addressed him in solemn warning. He criticized the violent act whereby he became king, and prophesied the misfortunes that they were shortly fall of kingdom. But Dunstan's influence at the court was ended. Dunstan retired to Canterbury to teach at the cathedral school. One of 3 and more public acts are known. In 1980, Dunstan joined Abbot of Mercia, the solemn transition of relics of King Edward, King of Canterbury, soon to be regarded as a saint, from the grave of Worcester to shrine of Shaftesbury Abbey in 984, in obedience to vision of St. Andrew, the pursued king of Edward, appoint Ethelred as a bishop of Winchester, and succession of Ethelwood in 986. Dunstan, induced by king and by donation of £100 of silver to stop his persecution of See of Rochester. Dunstan's retirement at the Canterbury consisted of long hours, both day and night, spent in private prayer, as well as a regular attendance of Western Rite liturgy and daily offices. He visited the shrines of St. Augustine and St. Ethelbert, and there were reports of vision of angels who sang him heavenly chants. He worked to improve spiritual and temporal, when beginning for well-being of his people, to build and restore the churches, establish the schools, and to judge suits, to defend widows and orphans, to promote peace and enforce respect of purity. He practiced his crafts and made bells and organs, corrected the books at the cathedral library. He encouraged protection of European scholars who came to England, and was active as a teacher of boys in cathedral school. In a Vigil of Ascension Day 1988, it was recorded that the vision of angels warned and he would die in 3 days. On the feast day itself, Dunstan said Mass and preached 3 times, so Western Rite liturgy, to the people at Gospel benediction, and after Agnus Dei, his last address was announcing impending the death. He said, you have to be independent to people, to depend only on God, and wished congregation well. That afternoon, he chose the spot for his tomb, and he went to his bed. His strength fell rapidly, and on Saturday morning, May 19, he caused the clergy to assemble. Divine Liturgy was celebrated, Western Rite Divine Liturgy, he's present, and he received extreme unction and vitacum, he died, so last rites and Holy Communion. Dunstan's final words were reported to be, "He had made me a remembrance of his wonderful works, being a merciful and gracious Lord. He had given food to them that fear him." The English people accepted him as a saint shortly thereafter. He was formally canonized in 1029. The year at the Synod of Winchester, St. Dunstan feast was ordered to kept solemnly and through the England. Until Thomas Beckford's fame overshadowed the Dunstan, he was a favorite saint of English people. Dunstan had been buried in cathedral. In 1880, his relics translated to the tomb of south side of high altar, and that was a building and restored after partially destroyed of fire in 1174. The monks of Glastonbury used to claim that during the sack of Canterbury by Danes in 1012, Dunstan's body had been carried to safety to their abbey. The story was disproved by Archbishop William Warham, who opened the tomb at Canterbury in 1508. They found the Dunstan's relics still to be there. With the century, however, his shrine was destroyed during English Reformation. Dunstan became a patron saint of English goldsmiths and silversmiths because they worked as a silversmith making church plate. The Eastern Orthodox Church and Roman Catholic Church feast is May 19. Dunstan also is honored in the Church of England and Episcopalian Church. Also, he is well known in English literature. English literature contains references for him. Example is A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. And the rhymer, Saint Dunstan's, as the story goes, once pulled at the devil's nose. With red hot tongues he made a roar, then was heard there miles more. This folk story already shown as an initial life of Saint Dunstan of Canterbury, passionate by second quarter of 12th century British Library in 315. Daniel Anisrek has 1012 suggested Dunstan to be medieval author of poem of Solomon of Saturn and many books were written on Saint Dunstan. He was a Bishop of London, and he's a London saint. Those of us who visited London had the great honor to know his legacy. So Saint Dunstan is a great saint, and celebrated both in West and East. He had influenced many monks of Benedictine's order in Orthodox Church of Western Rite, which existed in Rockor and Antiochian diocese, and in Western churches. Here is from manuscript from the book, his picture, and we have also an Orthodox icons of Saint Dunstan. Through his prayers, may our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ save you and bless you. Amen.